This morning, let's go to Numbers chapter 27. Numbers chapter 27. I've entitled the message, 5 Females Full of Faith. You have to work it. One of the commentaries I read, they said, Zelophehad's feisty females of faith. I thought, well, I'm not sure I'm going to go with that one, but there are 5 women, and you say, why are you singling them out as women? Because indeed, in that culture, in that time, this is a significant distinction. And so we're going to read this morning verses 1 through 11 and come back and look at this particular family and the unique situation they were in and what they did about it and how God responded to them. So Numbers chapter 27, let's begin reading in verse 1. Then came the daughters of Zelophehad, the son of Hepher, the son of Gilead, the son of Machir, the son of Manasseh, of the families of Manasseh, the son of Joseph. These are the names of his daughters, Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. And they stood before Moses and before Eleazar the priest and before the princes of all the congregation by the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, saying, Our father died in the wilderness. He was not in the company of them that gathered themselves together against the Lord in the company of Korah, but died in his own sin and had no sons. Why should the name of our father be done away from among his family because he hath no son? Give unto us, therefore, a possession among the brethren of our father. And Moses brought their cause before the Lord. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, The daughters of Zelophehad speak right. Thou shalt surely give them a possession of an inheritance among their father's brethren, and thou shalt cause the inheritance of their father to pass unto them. And thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel, saying, If a man die and have no son, then ye shall cause his inheritance to pass unto his daughter. And if he have no daughter, then ye shall give his inheritance unto his brethren. And if he have no brethren, then ye shall give his inheritance unto his father's brethren. And if his father have no brethren, then ye shall give his inheritance unto the kinsman that is next to him of his family. And he shall possess it, and it shall be unto the children of Israel a statute of judgment, as the Lord commanded Moses. Let's bow for a word of prayer. Father, this morning we come to you, mindful that we are needful of your help this morning. The needs that we see in our church, and Lord, in our community and across our nation, the natural disasters and needs that are tied to that. Lord, the physical pandemic and the virus, we need your help with that. And Lord, the political division and unrest, we need your help with that. We know that we cannot solve these issues, but we bring them to you. And this morning, as we look into your word, help us to catch a glimpse through this seemingly insignificant event in the grand scheme of things, of what you're accomplishing through this nation, through this great leader Moses, and through your chosen people and your great plan for all the ages that brought Christ to Calvary to save us. But you took the time to deal with the concerns of these 5 daughters. And Lord, as we look at this, help us to get a closer glimpse of who you are and how you care even for us. Apply your word to our hearts as we need it. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Do you ever feel like you're just a number? You know, people say, okay, what's your identification? You give them your name, says, now what's your social security number? What's this number? What's that number? And it seems like in the grand scheme of things of a military or of a country, we become just a number lost in the multitude of the crowd. Sometimes you try to call one of these agencies, and we don't even get a person anymore, hardly, do we? You get a computer or a system, and sometimes I get tickled watching my wife. She'll argue with the recording. The recording's going to say, I told you not to call me. I said, they can't hear you. But do you ever feel that way when you're doing something? And sometimes that carries over into our daily lives as challenges come to us. We kind of get the impression that, do I even bother praying about this? It seems so insignificant, so tiny. Does the God of the universe really care about my little insignificant needs? And the answer to that is yes. As we look at this passage, you saw this introduced back in chapter 26 and verse 33. Numbers 26:33 says, And Zelophehad, the son of Hepher, had no sons but daughters. And the names of the daughters of Zelophehad were Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. You say, what's the big deal about that? Well, stop and think of where they are listed. This is the listing of the second census of the nation of Israel, the second generation. They're preparing to go to war. They're preparing to conquer the promised land. And they were to count all the men 20 years and older, able to go to war. Well, these 5 are not men. Why are they mentioned in the census? And now why is there a section of 11 verses, and it will be again revisited in the last chapter of the book of Numbers? This is something that is significant to the Lord, and it was important enough not only to mention it in the census, and there's one other, and I still have not found the significance of Sirah, who's mentioned also in chapter 26 in that census count. But it brings us to something, it highlights this situation. And as I said, seemingly minor. But let's go back and understand the culture. When you go to understand the cultures of the Bible, and as God created this nation, the nation of Israel, through whom he would carry forth his plan for the ages, for humanity. It doesn't mean that he prefers them over us. It simply means he chose them for a unique purpose, to be a priestly nation among the nations of the world, through whom the scriptures would come, through whom the Messiah would come. But as he did this, you will find that going all the way back to the creation, the United States of America today would not accept God's form of government. They would say this isn't right. This is a male chauvinistic culture and government. And it is. Not that it's male chauvinistic, and it's not a matter of equality. See, we've gotten so concerned about equality, haven't we? I don't necessarily, we want justice and equality. Well, if we got justice, where would we be? Because justice would demand that we be condemned to hell because of our sin, outright. I thank God he doesn't give me justice. He gave me grace and mercy, and through that he saved me. But the cultures, when God established the family, he established an order. And there's an order for the church. There's an order for government, for society. And that order is God ordained, God prescribed, not because one is better than the other, but simply that was his design for mankind. Now they've rejected it. America has rejected it. And you look at the state of the family. Look at the state of the nation. We are so far away from the Lord. I was telling Donna on the way over here this morning, we were talking about it, and I said, I don't foresee an answer to the problem in our country except the coming of Christ. The rapture, and it's not going to get better, it's going to get far worse for 7 years, and then the Lord will come and establish his reign. So in the midst of all this, we go back to the desert. Right there, they're in the plains of Moab, just before crossing the Jordan to take possession of the land God has given them. They've just had some major victories. They had a major defeat there in chapter 25. Then chapter 26, God again tells Moses and now Eleazar, not Aaron, to count the people. And here in the beginning of chapter 27, all of a sudden in the midst of all this preparation to go to war, here come these 5 young ladies. Now this in and of itself is kind of unusual because it would not be the ladies who would come to make such a request before the leadership of a nation. It would have been the men of the house. so the fact that they entertained it, because it says here that they stood before Moses and Eleazar the priest and before the princes of all the congregation. So this is all, it'd be like them going before Congress and making their petition to Congress. Culturally, that's where they were. Now, here's the problem. Look at verse 1. And the daughters of Zelophehad. Zelophehad, he's a descendant of Manasseh. And this, remember, this was over the 40 years in the wilderness since the first counting, the 38 years. This is the tribe that had the greatest amount of growth of all the tribes. So these are daughters of Manasseh. This is one of the sons of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, that Jacob adopted, and they became two of the tribes. This is considered to be the tribe of Joseph, but it's divided into two. So this is from that tribe, the son of Gilead, son of Machir, the son of Manasseh, of the families of Manasseh, the son of Joseph, and these are the names of the daughters. Now, not only did they mention that he had 5 daughters, but the fact that they are named in Scripture twice is very significant. So this was important, so important that the Lord included it here 2 times. And they stood before Moses. Now, understand the culture. In the culture of that day, and to this day, in many of those Arabic cultures in that part of the world, they still follow these basic principles. You see, land inheritance and family inheritance is a sacred and very important thing to these families. But interestingly, women do not, at least up to this point, they did not inherit. Their inheritance came through their husbands. See, the sons would be the lineage through which the inheritance would go. That's why it was considered, many considered it even a judgment of God to have no children or to have only daughters and no sons. Because that was the line through which the inheritance would be given. But this is a very important and sacred thing. Now the women, you say, well, that's not fair. Well, remember, they receive a dowry when they are married. And the women receive that dowry as a very significant thing as well. And of course, then they're married to their husband, who is the one who is the heir of their father and the inheritance they would get through there. So they're not despised or neglected in that way. But that's the culture. They had that to look forward to, the dowry. But here's what happened. They were going through, and you see what they said, their explanation here. Our father died in the wilderness. He had no sons. So here you have Manasseh, the son of Joseph. He comes on down, and they divide off. But you get down to Machir, and he has Zelophehad, and he has no sons. So his name and his line and his clan is going to die with him. And that's the thing. And this means that when they get into the land and the land is divided out and allotted up, this particular family is going to receive nothing. They're not going to have a place that is theirs where they're going to have to find something among their relatives to where they can live with their relatives. Why did this happen? Well, we'll get to that in a moment. But that's basically because their father passed away before he had any sons. Well, now they come, and what do you do? So you have a problem here. It's a cultural problem. That's the first thing we see in this passage is culture. And many times we can get lost in culture and cultural situations. Now you say, did God forget about this problem? Did he not foresee this problem? Is this not part of his omniscience? Well, remember this. Had that first generation not rebelled against God, they would not have died in the desert as Zelophehad did. He would have been alive to enter the promised land, and he would have lived on and probably had the sons and passed this inheritance on that way as normal. But because that first generation rebelled against God and sinned, it created unforeseen circumstances. So now you come with this cultural aspect and you say, how do we deal with this? It's a real problem, but there is no precedent. Now look at the unprecedented situation. The law did not allow for this at this point. The culture did not allow for this at this point. Now, we can uniquely understand kind of the perspective, the situation they're in. Here's a tiny situation, a minority facing a problem that doesn't seem fair to them. What do you do about it? Well, bring it into 2020 United States of America. What do you do when something just doesn't seem fair to you or to your group? We go out, we make signs, and we gather people together that have nothing to do with it, and we get out in the street and we start protesting. And then we start becoming a little, people aren't listening, so we get a little more violent, a little more destructive, to the point that it's a major issue in the election today, something that should not even be existent in a land of laws and of culture, traditions. Is that what Zelophehad's daughters did? No. I want you to look thirdly. First, culture. Look at the unprecedented or the lack of precedent for this situation. But I want you to see how they approached it. Secondly, they approached it with a respectful request. They did not come out with the signs and try. See, Korah, when he was not pleased that he and his other Kohathites, one of the clans of the tribe of Levi, that they were not able to minister in the holy place and the Holy of Holies as Aaron's son, appointed by God to do so. So he gathers 250, and then Dathan and Abiram, who are upset about something else, and they all get together and go up against Moses and Aaron and say, who made you? Who made you the ruler over it? Who made you the ones that could do? Are we not Levites? Are we not priests? Can we not all serve in this? And you saw what happened. God judged them and God took their life. In fact, that's the rebellion. She said, now my dad was not part of that mess. That was how, see, that's not very different from what we're seeing going on in our country today. No, they approached it this way. The Bible says, verse 2, and they said they came, and the word came there in verse 1 is they drew near. And the implication of this means that they came respectfully and humbly before the leaders of the nation. And they stood before Moses, verse 2, and before Eleazar the priest, and before the princes of all the congregation, by the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, saying. Now, at this point, I don't know if their voices were shaken, but this would be kind of like us walking into an open session of Congress and saying, Speaker Pelosi, can I say something? Can we make a request? Now, my guess is you probably wouldn't have made it that far because you'd been arrested and taken someplace else by this point in Congress. But here they are at the door of the tabernacle, the seat where I'm sure they met to take care of the business of the nation. And they come up and they say, listen, our father died. We're the daughters of Zelophehad, and he died in the wilderness, but he was not in the company of them that gathered themselves together against the Lord in the company of Korah. He was not part of that mess that we went through a few chapters back. But notice what they also said. They did not try to minimize it. Said, but he died of his own sin and had no sons. So they approached this with the respect and through the proper channels that it should have gone through, even though they probably, humanly speaking, had no hope of getting anything out of the leadership. We'll look at that in a moment. But it took faith on their part to believe the law does not provide for this, culture does not provide for this, no precedent argues against this. But let's go ask for it anyway. Do you ever feel like you're in a situation that is impossible? I say there's no point in even praying about it because what's going to happen? Follow along. But the third thing we see here is we see sin. Isn't sin the cause of all these problems? In fact, the reason these 5 young ladies are in this position they are in is because of the sin of their father, who apparently was just part of that first generation. He was not part of that major situation with Korah. It doesn't mean he couldn't have been part of the other situations. Remember when they despised the manna and asked for meat? And God sent quail, and many of them died, even while it spoiled while it was in their teeth. And many died from that. Others died from the fire in the camp for other reasons, for murmuring against the Lord, back in chapters 11, 12, 13. We don't know if that's one of the, or if it's simply because when the spies came back and gave the evil report of the land, and all the people stood up against Moses and Aaron and said, we're going back to Egypt, and God, he was going to destroy them, and Moses talked him out of it. But God says, as surely as I live, you will not enter the promised land. Anyone who is 20 years or older when they left Egypt, you will not enter the land that I promised you. And Zelophehad was part of that, and most likely that is what it refers to when it says he died of his own sin. Some say God was kind of harsh, wasn't he? With Israel. I mean, after all that he had done, wasn't he kind of harsh to say, no, you're going to, not only are you not going in, you're going to die in the wilderness, that first generation. But your kids are sentenced to stay with you for the next 38 years until you do die. And then they will go in and inherit the land that I promised you. But how many sins does it take for us to be under God's judgment? Moses, this man of God, a man like no other. We're going to look tonight at his life and the end of his life. And we're going to go to the last verses of the book of Deuteronomy, which is God's assessment of his servant Moses. And but the Bible says there never arose another prophet like Moses. But he sinned one time. His sin was that he disobeyed the Lord out of anger with the people, and he struck the rock the second time instead of speaking to it as God had instructed. And God said, because of this, you and Aaron will not enter the promised land. You will die this side of the Jordan. And tonight we're going to see how he even entreated the Lord, maybe right after this situation, seeing how God had worked and was merciful to these young ladies. Maybe he thought, maybe if I ask the Lord again to just let me go in and see it. We'll see that tonight as we look at that. But he was denied. He spent all that time, 40 years preparing, then 40 years in the house of Pharaoh, then 40 years in the desert watching the sheep of Jethro, his father-in-law. At 80, he sets out to fulfill his career of leading the children of Israel from Egypt to the promised land, and he is now pushing 120 years of age. And he's going to die short of it because he disobeyed the Lord. He did not die of old age. In fact, the Bible says his eyes were not dim, his strength was not abated. He died prematurely because of that sin. But I want you to stop and think of this. Before you start thinking too harshly of God, do we understand that it took one sin to condemn all of mankind to hell? Are you aware of that? When Adam sinned in the Garden of Eden, the Bible says by him sin came into the world and it passed to all mankind. So that all are born with a sin nature, and from birth we are condemned to hell. You don't have to do anything. Understanding that plight and that situation, we have come to take a very different view of sin, haven't we? But God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. And all of this that we've been studying is the beginning of that story of how God raised up a nation through whom he would bring his word and the Messiah and his plan for all mankind. But this man died in the desert because of his sin. Now, the place where he died is also significant. Remember, Egypt pictures the world in bondage. Their redemption, the application of the blood and their redemption from Egypt and crossing the Red Sea is a picture of God's salvation. And the promised land is the picture of that spiritual maturity. But Zelophehad and all of his generation, they died in the wilderness, saved from Egypt, yes, but never delivered to the fullness of God's blessings for them. How many Christians do the same thing? Because of sin, we die in spiritual immaturity, never reaching the mature plateau that God wants us to find in the spiritual life, that are the fullness of His blessings and promises to us on this earth. We're not talking about heaven. Now, these that died in the wilderness, did they lose their salvation? No. In fact, I believe Zelophehad will one day in the millennial kingdom probably enjoy that inheritance that his daughters sought for him. But sin is a serious matter. He died in the wilderness, and the last phrase, but he died in his own sin and had no sons. When we come to God, we come. You can't come to the Lord and try to justify your sin. You can't come to the Lord and try to deny your sin. You can't come and ignore your sin. And they didn't try to do this. They simply said, our father sinned, and God's judgment on him and his entire generation, it left us in this predicament. So we see the culture. We see the respectful submission and the request. We see the sin. Now I want you to look fourthly at an unexpected request. An unprecedented request. Verse 4, why should the name of our father be done away from among his family, because he hath no son? Give unto us, therefore, a possession from among the brethren of our father. Now, the first reaction some people have to this request is, and I can imagine, if you had transported this situation in Israel forward just about 1,500 years to the time of Christ, and you had the Pharisees and the scribes, and these 5 daughters had come to them with an unprecedented request like this one, you know what they would have said? The law is clear. There's no precedent for this. Get out of here. We don't have time for you. Because that's how they dealt with it. In fact, the unprecedented situation of the Messiah coming, even though it had been prophesied and it was all throughout the Scriptures that they considered themselves masters of, they missed it. And they crucified the Lord of glory because it did not fit into what they thought the scheme was. They were still holding on to that law. They rejected the grace. But we're going to see the wisdom of the leadership in just a moment. But they decided, we're going to go and we're going to ask. You know, there's something about asking these things. The Bible says the effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. And also the book of James chapter 4 verse 2 says, you have not because ye ask not, and when you ask amiss. You ask wrongly for the wrong motives. Well, some will question the motives of these young ladies. Says, who do they think they are? They're not supposed to get this. Okay, their father sinned. Well, that's their tough luck. That's just, that's the way it goes. They said, no, we're going to come. I don't believe that's the reason they came. I don't believe their request was about land. In fact, their focus isn't upon the land. The focus is upon their father who died without sons. They said, why should the name of our father be done away from among his family? These 5 young ladies were there defending the honor and the memory of their father. It wasn't about them. They would have had their inheritance through their husband. They would have had all these things, but they were concerned about the name of their father being carried forth. And the provision that was made was going to make that possible through the other laws that were already in play. Not selfish. Now, sometimes we, today, the key to, in psychology, say the key to life is finding who to blame. Well, I have this problem, but the problem I have is because of my family, or because of my mom and dad, or because of the government, or because of poverty, and we start blaming everything else under the sun for our problems. And these 5 young ladies could have done the same thing. They didn't do that. In fact, they said, we love our dad. Yes, he rebelled with the rest of the nation, and he died in the wilderness. But that left us, unlike probably most of the other families. And there were other situations, I'm sure, just like theirs, but they never had the faith and the confidence to come and ask. These young ladies came and they made this unexpected request. And fifthly, I want you to look at the humble spiritual leadership. As I said, if you had transported 1,500 years later, the Pharisees and scribes would have probably told her, get out of here. We just went through all this census, and we're getting ready. We're developing our battle plan to go into and conquer the promised land. We don't have time to deal with these little concerns. Verse 5, and Moses brought their cause before the Lord. Now it's interesting, not only is it humble leadership, it's spiritual leadership, it's wise leadership. Sometimes as leaders, we assume we have all the answers. I get quite amused watching all these requests to these presidential candidates, most of whom lie through their teeth. Oh, if you elect me president, this is what I'm going to do. You don't know what you're going to do. By the grace of God and by the mercy of God and under God's wisdom, you might do something to prosper, but if God doesn't fight for you, you're doomed. Moses did not presume that, well, we already have the law. I went up on Sinai and I had to write all that stuff down, and then I had to come down and teach it to you, and we had to put it into play and to enforce it. No, we're not adding any more laws. They could have gone based on what the law was in the book. Yes, he sinned. This is a consequence of that sin. Sorry. Move on. But he didn't do that. Moses himself, the leader of the nation, he said, let me take this to the Lord. You know, that is the response we need to take more often than not. In fact, I would say that about every decision ought to be bathed in prayer before we pursue it. Take it to the Lord in prayer. And these men did this. Well, we come to the second part of the chapter. I want you to look at verse 6. Now, this is nothing short of astonishing. Here are these women who culturally had no standing, had no ground to stand on. Their request was unprecedented. The law did not allow for it. And they bring it to the leadership, and the leadership not only hears them, but the very head of the nation, it'd be, in our case, it would be the President of the United States himself, was going to bat for us. Said, I'm going to take your cause before the Lord. Now let's imagine the highest court in our land is the Supreme Court. And of course that is in full view today. Starting tomorrow we have the hearings, and that's another whole ball of wax. But imagine that our cause is this, and we take it to the president. He says, you know what, I'm going before the Supreme Court myself, and I'm going to argue your case for you. He intercedes. See, that's why Moses is a picture of Christ. He takes our petitions, our needs, and he intercedes on our behalf before the creator of the universe, God the Father, the sustainer of all there is. And the astonishing thing is, and the Lord spake unto Moses, saying. Now, if you think Moses and the princes of the nation of Israel are busy, and they are, what about the God of the universe, who's controlling every movement of every star and every planet and the tides and all those other things? He is sustaining all of that. But yet he had the time to listen to the request of these 5 orphan daughters. What does that tell us about our God? Number one, he is a powerful God. He is a sovereign God. He is a living God. And he is a God who hears, as he told Hagar in that wilderness. He identified, I'm the God who, I know you're out there by yourself, Hagar. And the first time he met with her, he said, now you need to go back to Sarah. And the second time when the Lord told Abraham, you need to send her and Ishmael away, and she sent them away. And she thought she was going to die in the wilderness. And God said, I'm not going to let you die here. You're going to live, and your son's going to be blessed. He's going to have an inheritance, and nations and kings are going to come from him, and they have. God hears that lonely voice. Go to the New Testament. You see that woman in the crowd with the issue of blood, and she's trying to get to Jesus, knowing that he could heal her, and she can't get to him, but she goes and she touches the hem of his garment. And in all that hustle and bustle and the noise, and what did Jesus say? Who touched me? And if you've ever been over there, you look at him and say, why are you asking? Everybody's touching you. We can't help but do that. No, I felt glory go out. Did he know who touched? Yes, he knew. But even in the midst of it, whether you're alone in the wilderness or you're in the midst of a huge crowd, God knows you're there. He hears your request. And here's the next part. Let's look at the results of their faith and those things they did there very quickly. Number one, God heard their cause. We see that in verse 6. Second, God agreed with their case, their argument. Now, they say that to argue before the Supreme Court, you had better be very, very well prepared. And they're going to be peppering questions at you, and you only have so much time. And if you're not prepared, you're done. They argued through Moses before the Lord, and the Lord took up their cause, and he said this, the daughters, verse 7, the daughters of Zelophehad speak right. They're right. Not only is it unprecedented, an unforeseen situation by the children of Israel, you say, well, why didn't God resolve this to start with? Well, because he didn't make provision for them to fail. He made provision for them to succeed. They rebelled against that, creating the need for this legislation that's coming up. So God heard and he agreed with their argument. Thirdly, God granted them their request. They had the faith and the courage to ask, and God gave them the answer to their prayer. He said, thou shalt surely give them a possession of an inheritance among their father's brethren. Thou shalt cause the inheritance of their father to pass unto them. What their father would have received, you're going to give to them. Now, this isn't the extent of their faith and their request and their courage to go and ask. That's not as far as this went. You see, their faith and their believing that they could accomplish something significant for themselves through this and for their father's name and to honor him. But do you realize that sometimes our step of faith will have an impact upon others? Look at the next verse. And thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel. Now this is the whole nation. Saying, if a man die and he have no son, ye shall cause his inheritance to pass to his daughter. All those others in there that didn't necessarily have the boldness, courage, or maybe didn't even think about going and making this request. Maybe they didn't think that much of their father. I don't know what the situation was, but none of them went. But these five, their faith, their request, and God's listening to that, not only did he grant their request, but he also granted it for all the others in the nation of Israel through them. You see, when we act and we behave in faith, believing God and doing the things that God would have us do, our faith can have an impact and even bless others through us. Not only that, and look at the different there are 4 different eventualities that God says, not only in their case, but if there are others, verse 8, you do the same for them. Then verse 9, but if he have no daughter, then you shall give his inheritance to his brothers. And if he have no brothers, then you shall give his inheritance to his father's brothers. And if his father have no brethren, then you shall give his inheritance unto his kinsman that is next to him of his family. He shall possess it, and it shall be unto the children of Israel, for the whole nation. It's a statute of judgment, as the Lord commanded Moses. These 5 females full of faith, they wrought change in the nation of Israel because they had the confidence to go and ask. What is it we're hesitant to ask God for this morning? Do we have that faith that these had? You know, everything about us requires faith. We need the faith to be saved. What does that mean? We have heard the gospel that we are sinners. Because of our sin, we're condemned to a Christless eternity in hell. Do you believe that, first of all? That's the first step of faith, to hear the truth. But the other part of that is that God so loved us, He gave His Son to die for us, and He offers through Him salvation if we will receive it. But you must believe and act upon that belief of what you heard and receive that gift of salvation for yourself. Zelophehad's daughters can't go and do that for you. Every last one of us must do it on our own. Do you have the faith to be saved this morning? If you're not saved. If you are saved, do you have the faith to live boldly? To ask of the Lord the things, say, well, there's no way God's going to give me this. Ask. Time and time again, there are times you pray and you think this is impossible. I've shared with you the situation when we were in Egypt and we lacked 6,000, well, it was 16, but we were down to a point where we had exhausted every resource we knew to go to. And we still lacked between $5,000 and $6,000 to pay for the modules where we were right then. And I had to pay the bills. And we prayed. God didn't give us the money. And God didn't give us a discount. He saw fit to change the entire economy of the nation of Egypt and alter a historical event. It altered the currency of the nation of Egypt to where the value of the money we had was just enough to pay the bills. And I'll tell you, to this day, it gives me chills to stop and think. And it wasn't in that month or that year or week. It was in that hour that we needed it. Any earlier would not have helped us. Any later would not have helped us. It had to be within that 1 hour. And the more I've studied it and all that, the more amazing it becomes to me. The effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man. There were a lot of people praying. Was it because of my prayer? I don't think so. Could have been. Was it the prayer of someone at Bible Baptist Church that the Lord just put us on the mind and says, well, let's pray for them over there right now? We don't know. But we need to have the faith to go to Him to live boldly. And also, do you have the faith regarding eternity? You know, it's one thing to be saved and know we're saved, but sometimes we lack the faith to face death and eternity. We fail to see, we grab a hold of this life so tightly, even as believers, that we forget that this is going to pass. We focus on the here and now and the things of this world instead of having the faith for those crowns that have eternal value in heaven. If we have that kind of faith, we're going to live here, building that value that has eternal value. Take that word, apply it to your hearts. These 5 females full of faith, and may they serve as an example to us in how we should live our lives, even in very difficult situations. Let's bow for prayer. Father, we thank You for this account. Perhaps by the mind of many editors or men's judgment, this would be something fairly insignificant in the grand scheme of the story. But the Bible is Your story. It's not ours. And You saw fit not only to mention it twice, but a third time. And help us to learn from this. Not only learn about this situation, but Lord, more importantly, we learn about You. Thank You that You are a living, sovereign, almighty, sustaining, loving, merciful God. And You are gracious to us. May we also never lose sight that in this message we also see that You were a just and righteous God, and You judged righteously that first generation, Korah and those that rebelled with him, and that entire first generation for rejecting You and Your promises and lacking faith. Lord, may all these things we can learn about You, may they mold our life and our behavior and our faith in You. So much so that others will see it and they will trust You because of it. Do in us now as you please, we pray in Christ's name. Amen.